very happy to welcome you here today on behalf of Respond, Clúid and Circle Housing. So my job here today is really to keep proceedings on track and to ensure that we finish on time. So as you will all know well, housing is a key determinant of health and having a secure, safe and affordable home can impact so many areas of life. AHBs, approved housing bodies, provide those in housing need with access to quality homes to enable full participation in societies. But AHBs, as you all know, invest in communities, so our work goes well beyond individual and the physical homes that we provide. While we can measure and we have established mechanisms to track and the number of homes that we deliver or the households in secure and permanent accommodation, our standard tenant satisfaction rates in relation to our service, it's more difficult to measure the positive ripple effects of a stable home on society more broadly. In collaboration, Clúid Housing, Respond and Circle Voluntary Housing Association commissioned Just Economics to develop a bespoke measurement framework to capture the broad-reaching activities and social impact of AHBs in Ireland and our potential role in creating and supporting sustainable communities beyond the homes that we deliver. It is our intention that this tool will be used by the wider AHB sector, contributing to the creation of a robust body of evidence that captures the real impact and benefits of social housing for both tenants and communities across Ireland. We have an interesting range of speakers to take us through the research and the framework this morning, discussing the potential of implementing this research in your organisation and how we may best use the data and the information to better inform our work to effectively deliver housing and to build communities. This is very much the start of our journey, and we're delighted that you've joined us here today to hear our story so far. There are over 200 participants here this morning. We're delighted so many of you were able to join us. But if you do have any questions, if you could kindly type them into the chat function and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can as possible. So what we have are a number of speakers and then we'll have a panel discussion, and we have a speaker from Just Economics who will talk us through the research. So our first speaker this morning is John Hannigan. John Hannigan is the CEO of Circle Voluntary Housing Association. John has over 30 years of experience in the housing sector, including senior roles with some being housing services with us here in Respond Housing Association, and he has also held senior executive roles in the corporate sector, including KPMG, Grant Thornton and EY. He is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Housing, a Fellow of the Association of the Certified Accountants, and a Chartered Member of the Institute of Directors in Ireland. John is also a member of the board of the ICSH, the Irish Council of Social Housing, chair of the Chartered Institute of Housing in Ireland, and a member of the Chartered Institute of Housing governing body and its Finance Audit and Risk Subcommittee. Thanks, John.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Nate. Thank you very much for the introduction. It was supposed to be shorter, so I do apologise. It's fantastic to have everybody here, and as Niamh has already mentioned, AHBs have a common objective, and that is to provide our tenants with and residents with quality, stable, affordable homes as part of their community and wider society. We offer more than just four walls and a roof, and we provide homes that are safe and secure, a base from which our tenants and residents can flourish. Our three organisations, Clúid, Circle and Respond, are all members of the Housing Alliance and have demonstrated fantastic collaboration in their approach to this project. For those of you who don't know, the Alliance is a collaboration of six of Ireland's largest housing associations, and we formed a number when we formed, we had a number of objectives in mind. These include delivery of high quality, social and affordable homes, but also addressing barriers and challenges to that delivery and promoting strong professional approaches to housing management. And collaboration is not just between the AHBs, but with our colleagues in government, local authorities, the ICSH, and other agencies, and is more important than ever that we work to provide for people's housing needs, which go way beyond just bricks and mortar during this time of a housing crisis. Collaboration has also been a key theme in this project to date, and we hope that this morning that you will see that has been built on, and as we move forward, we continue to develop that collaboration. The research came about as a result of a number of reasons, but the main one being that it's been long understood by those working in approved housing bodies that our role extends beyond just the handing over of a set of keys. Whilst it is easy for us to point to the number of homes we've delivered or the number of individuals and families living in our homes, it's far more difficult to measure that part we can play in creating sustainable and vibrant communities. It's becoming increasingly important that we really understand the extent and potential that what we do and importantly can deliver beyond a home is understood. Measuring this type of impact is important, but very difficult. To date, the actual impacts of the AHB tenancy have not been clearly identified or measured. As such, we have not had the concrete data to truly understand the value and impact of social housing through approved housing bodies. Circle, Clúid and Respond, three of Ireland's largest approved housing bodies, and all members of the Housing Alliance have come together at the beginning of 2022 to seek a research proposal on measuring the impact, social impact of approved housing body tenancies. A number of very high quality proposals were received, and following review and interview, the researchers, Just Economics, were commissioned, and we're delighted that they've carried out this work. The objectives of the research were following their appointment. Just Economics set about developing a bespoke measurement framework, which they will speak to later on in this presentation. Nonetheless, the objective of this was to capture the broad-reaching activities, social impact of AHBs in Ireland, and our potential role of AHBs in creating and supporting sustainable communities. As a key part of this launch, it's not just to present the research and the report, which are fantastic high quality materials, but also to be a call really for participation from the rest of our colleagues in approved housing bodies. We intend that this tool is not just for our use, but open for use by the wider AHB sector. Through the use of the tool by more organisations, it will contribute to the creation of a robust body of evidence that captures the real impact and benefits of social housing for tenants, residents and communities. And we're happy to share our experience with you, all in the hope that you will join us in our journey along the way. Together, we can contribute to building communities where every individual has the chance to thrive and fully live their life, contributing to a fair and equitable society. As we share the initial findings of our work, we will do more than present data. We will share the stories of resilience, courage, success, and that have emerged from our collective efforts. These stories underscore the vital role of AHBs and the life-changing potential of safe and affordable housing. In the future, such data will be invaluable in providing and improving services and contributing to the more comprehensive understanding of the significance of a safe, affordable home to provide stability necessary to participate in all of the aspects of life. So we hope that you enjoyed the presentations this morning. We would love to get your feedback in respect of it afterwards, and we look forward to you hoping that you will be able to contribute further to the evidence that we collect as we go along. So I'm going to hand back to Niamh and look forward to your feedback.
Thank you very much, John. And as John mentioned, this project really was the fruit of a lot of collaboration and partnership between the three organisations, obviously working with Just Economics, but also working with our tenants around the country as well in terms of putting together this framework. And really, I suppose, that piece in terms of, we're stronger together, and by working together and by putting together and collaborating, we were able to do so much more than a single entity. So really, we do hope that people will be interested in this. We will be sharing the reports after the seminar. We'll be sharing them with individuals who are in attendance here, but also they'll be on the three organisations' websites as well, so you'll be able to access them there. So now our next speaker is Dr. Eilish Lawler, who's a director with Just Economics. Eilish has worked with Just Economics for over 20 years, and she's got experience in research and policy, where she's led several evaluations in the housing and homeless projects in Ireland and the UK. She's going to talk you through the bespoke framework that they've worked with us in development. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Niamh, and I'm really pleased to be invited here this morning to present the findings from this really interesting research. So just to kick off, if we could have the first slide there. So just in terms of context, so I guess the background to this research is that there is a lack of research on the impact of social housing on tenants internationally, but in Ireland especially, and on the Irish model of social housing as well. The most pressing gaps we've identified are around, firstly, who lives in social housing, what their, a bit more detail, I guess, on the individuals that live in social housing, their aspirations and barriers to achieving those aspirations, the impact that the social home has on their lives, their outstanding support needs or priorities, and the role of the social landlord in addressing those needs. So next slide, please. So we've heard a little bit already about why measuring social impact matters. And I think from our perspective, it's important to point out that when we think of social impact, we're talking about change for tenants, okay? So it differs from, the traditional tenant satisfaction measurement that has been happening for some time across the sector, in that it tracks outcomes. So these are the changes that take place for tenants, and also the distance traveled towards those outcomes. So what we mean by distance traveled is that, we know that things like employment and education and mental health and so on, they're not issues that get resolved overnight. And so distance traveled measures the steps towards those outcomes, or indeed away from those outcomes at times. And the reason we want to do this is to help address the research gaps that I've outlined and that others have outlined earlier, but also to evidence the added value of social housing relative to other tenures. And again, that's a real area, there's a real gap in relation to that area. And then finally, to support organisational learning. So another benefit of measuring social impact, and particularly if you do it the way in which we've done it, is that it gives a voice to tenants. And that's not just for its own sake. Tenant perspectives can inform the design and delivery of housing and improve the accountability of AHBs to their tenants. And then finally, it can inform policy and spending decisions. So evidencing the impact of AHBs can support value for money arguments, and it can inform policy and spending decisions around housing. And then this in turn also leads to improved accountability for AHBs to governments, who are also a key stakeholder for the sector. So in terms of the aims of the framework, we want to really fill some of those gaps that I've just identified. So we want to develop a richer picture of who lives in social housing and build those tenant profiles, what their needs are and what their aspirations are. We want to evidence impact to enable the AHBs to do that as organisations, so they can individually evidence their impact, and then also more widely as a sector. As I mentioned, a further aim is to support and continuous improvement, which is a really important aspect of evaluation. It's often attractive to organizations for the purposes of demonstrating their impact, but actually, a key strength really is in, organizational learning. And the aim of this would be that it would provide timely data on strengths and weaknesses in the design, delivery, or management of housing. Again, there's this wider aim that John talked about in terms of that sector-wide approach. So we'd like to encourage the wider AHB social housing sector to work towards a common framework. And I would really commend the three organisations in coming together and sharing this work. And there are risks for them with this, because as they go through in terms of gathering data, the strengths as well as weaknesses will be identified, and I think it's really positive that they've come together to do this. And then finally, to inform policy. So as I said, we want to build a robust sector-wide evidence base that can inform future housing policy. So in terms of the scope, I think it's important to point out that we just looked at general needs housing and specialist housing for older people. So the research doesn't currently cover cost rental. And I know that's a growing part of the AHB portfolio, and I think it's really important. I would see it as really important that this kind of framework is extended to cost rental over time. I think much of what's been developed is transferable. However, cost rental, probably does require some tweaks and would have a, maybe a slightly different theory of change. But I think it would be really positive if this kind of measurement also covered cost rental, because that's also an area where there are huge evidence gaps. So we covered a four-phase process. We started with a literature and policy review of Ireland, the UK, and internationally. The findings from that review are available in the evidence summary. So 2 reports are being published this morning. There's an overview of the framework, most of which I'm going to talk you through this morning. And then there's also an evidence summary and a lot of the background research that went into developing the framework is presented in that summary. We then moved on to stakeholder engagement. So we did interviews with experts in the housing sector. We interviewed tenants and we engaged with staff. All of that information, so from the desk research and the stakeholder engagement, fed into developing what we call a theory of change. So a theory of change sets out the outcomes that you include, that you then want to measure. And then you go through a process of identifying indicators to measure those outcomes. So indicators are ways of measuring outcomes. And then those indicators are what form the basis of the survey tools that we've developed. So basically, the first 2 phases are a knowledge or evidence gathering process that then feeds into the development of the framework. We then piloted the survey tools with tenants and refined those tools based on that feedback. And then the framework was ready to go. And then in the final phase, we did some capacity building with the 3 organizations. So we did a training workshop with each AHB. Each organization has their own implementation process, which suits their organization, and they're still in the process of fine-tuning those. So once they're complete, we will also produce a written guidance for each organization. They're broadly following the same process, which I'll take you through this morning, but there are some bespoke tweaks for each organization. Okay, so a bit more detail on the framework. So at a very high level, it will ask all new tenants to participate in completing the surveys. And we split the tenants into 3 categories. So we've got general needs housing for adults, general needs housing for children, and specialist housing for older people. So each of these groups will have their own theory of change. However, it's important to point out that there will be 2 surveys disseminated, one for general needs adults and one for older people in specialist housing. For children, we're asking parents to report on outcomes for their children. So that avoids having to do research directly with children, which is much more complicated. So we'll have parent reports on children's outcomes. And then at a very high level, what's involved is that tenants are asked to complete surveys at regular intervals. The first one, which we call the baseline survey, will take place will be disseminated when they first receive their offer. And then the second survey takes place 6 months after they've taken up their tenancy, and then 12 months after that. And then there will be annual surveys ongoing for the lifetime of the tenancy, subject to the tenant opting into that. So this is just a very quick slide to show the overview of the theory of change. I'm not going to talk you through this because there's a lot of detail in this slide, but I just wanted to show it to you because I have been saying that this is kind of the foundation of the evaluation framework. So I just wanted to kind of give you, this is the general needs housing, to give you a snapshot of it. So as you can see, it's split into outcomes for adults and children. So we move through short, medium term outcomes to longer term outcomes, and then these kind of wider societal changes that we expect to take place. And then this all happens in the context of the needs that exist and what the AHB provider is, how the AHB provider is responding. So these will be are available in the reports. You can look at them in more detail, but I just wanted to just give you a very quick view of what the an example of the theory of change was like. So next slide, thank you. Okay, so a little more detail on the surveys. So the surveys were developed based on the outcomes set out in the theory of change, as I've said, and we engaged stakeholders to identify what the most important changes for AHB tenants were, and then indicators were identified to measure how often those changes took place amongst tenants. All of the surveys captured key demographics such as age, gender, ethnicity, disability, previous housing experiences, including if they'd had experience of homelessness. We used validated scales where possible, such as the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, and or we align the questions with national statistics. So this would enable comparison. So for example, the CSO's life satisfaction data, we've got the same questions in the survey, so that as we collect data over time, we'll be able to compare life satisfaction with the national averages, which is also broken down by income group, so we can get some good comparisons with appropriate control groups there. We have generally followed a lean data approach. So that means that we are asking the minimum number of questions required to find out whether an outcome, to measure an outcome. Now, when I say lean data, that housing is very multifaceted, so there are a lot of outcome areas. So we are covering a lot in the survey. So I wouldn't describe them as short. They take about 15 minutes to complete. However, we are capturing a lot of information in those 15 minutes. So that the lean data approach is to, ask the questions in the shortest possible way. So we're not asking for any unnecessary information. It wasn't possible to have a proper control group or comparison group for this research, which is very common in social science. However, we were very interested in this idea of additionality, the additional added value of AHBs. And so we did seek to capture that, and we had a few strategies to do that. So first of all, we inferred a baseline. So ideally, we would compare tenants' previous housing situations when they're in situ with their experiences in their AHB tenancy. However, we don't know in advance who's going to be offered housing, so it's not possible to do that. So what we've asked tenants to do is to reflect back on the 3 months prior to being offered the tenancy. And what we found from our pilot is that people had good recall of what their previous housing situation was like. When they get the survey initially, they may well still be living in the previous housing situation. So it's as close as we can get to kind of what you might call a proper baseline. We have also included attribution scales. So after we've asked questions in relation to a particular outcome, we then ask the tenants to what extent any changes they've reported are as a result of their housing experience. And that just takes account of the fact that other things are going on in the lives of tenants and other things could be impacting on those outcomes. And so that gives us a sense of how attributable those changes are to their housing circumstances. And then you can also assess additionality qualitatively. And that was a big focus of our interviews with housing experts. So we asked people, we explored additionality qualitatively in our interviews. And as I said, you can find a discussion of this in the evidence summary. So I've talked about the outcomes a lot, and I'm just going to quickly talk you through the outcome areas that are included in the surveys. So the first one is well-being, and what we're covering there is ontological security, empowerment, confidence, and privacy, mental health, especially depression and anxiety, social outcomes such as improved friendships, relationships, social networks, and then a tenant's own ability to develop their own support networks. Outcomes relating to use of time, so new opportunities in education, employment, community work, hobbies, time spent commuting to work, school, family, etc. Health, particularly in relation to respiratory illnesses and diet, safety in the home or public spaces and feelings of safety, access to services, financial skills such as affordability, debt, etc., and relationships, so managing key relationships in relation to the landlord, neighbours, services, parenting, financial, and so on. For children, it broadly follows the same outcomes, particularly ones that are relevant to children, but also includes education and behaviour. And for older people, again, it broadly follows the same outcomes, but there's more emphasis on fear of crime and ability to live independently for longer. So I'm just going to show you a couple of sample questions because I think that's always useful to kind of be able to visualize something. So this is just one example of a question asked in relation to housing. So we ask people, thinking about the 3 months before you were offered the tenancy with your housing provider, please tick the box that best describes your experience of each of the following. I felt safe and secure in my neighborhood. I felt safe and secure in my home. I felt safe and secure in my relationships. My housing situation was putting strain on my relationships. My privacy was respected. I felt empowered to make positive changes in my life. I had a sense of belonging or social connectedness to my community. And then we ask people to report on whether that's happened none of the time, rarely, some of the time, often, or all of the time. Then we have another question in relation to finances. So just another example. So in your previous accommodation, was there any time that the following happened? Please select all that apply. You did not pay the full amount of rent or mortgage or were late with a payment because you could not afford to pay. You were not able to pay the full amount of gas, oil, electricity, or another utility bill. A utility company turned off the service, or the oil company would not deliver oil. You or people who lived with you lacked essential items such as food, clothing, footwear, or toiletries, or none of the above. So in relation to dissemination and accessibility, which are obviously very important. So I mentioned that each organization developed a bespoke process, but there were some broad commonalities, which I'm just going to quickly take you through. So the surveys are disseminated via an online link sent to every tenant with their offer and at follow-up points. The survey's been developed in Qualtrics, which I think each of the organisation is going to continue to use, and we would recommend it as it's fully GDPR compliant. Data are inputted anonymously by the tenant. And again, this is a kind of, I suppose, a distinction with the tenant satisfaction or other data collection that might be taking place. It is completely anonymous, and so it's an opportunity for the tenant to really give their perspective without having to put their name on it. In line with GDPR requirements, consent is sought and participation is voluntary. The survey is designed to be user-friendly, so you've seen from the examples that I gave you earlier, we use a lot of boxes and multiple choice. There are options for people to put free text in, but we just have one or two of those to minimize the length of time it takes to complete it and to make it easier to analyze as well. And then it's also optimized for completion on mobile. So we would envisage that most tenants would complete this on their mobiles. Translation, audio plugins, translation, audio plugins and voice recorder are all available in Qualtrics. So this is to deal with any language and literacy issues that tenants might be experiencing. And then finally, it's recommended that older people are offered support to complete it because they may have particular digital inclusion issues or they may have difficulty with typing. So we're recommending that tablets are provided in specialist housing and that support is available from site managers should they need it. We piloted the survey with tenants, and I just thought I'd give you some quick feedback on that because after the tenants had completed the survey, we asked them to give some feedback on their experience of completing the survey. And that was very positive. So 100% said they would be happy to be contacted again. 100% said that they were comfortable with the questions. 85% said that they were reassured their confidentiality was protected. 95% they said they felt they could be completely honest. Nobody found it too complicated or too difficult. A minority found it a bit too long, but that's to be expected. And around 60% said that they thought some tenants would complete it, and 40% thought that all tenants would complete it. So we were really pleased with those results. And actually, since then, we have, at that time, we weren't going to have a completely anonymous survey. It now is completely anonymous. So I think we can probably get that confidentiality up higher than that in the actual survey. So finally, as I said, each organisation is at various stage of implementing the framework, which I think is really fantastic. And then they'll move on to start to capture baseline data. So we'll start to see that data coming through, and then hopefully there'll be an opportunity for the organisations to publish the baseline findings. But it will be a few years yet before we start to really see whether, you know, the results of whether or not some of those changes are taking place and to what extent. But I guess one of the purposes of today is to share these findings to try and get more people involved. And I've just put up some of the contact details there if anyone would like to get in touch with any of the three organisations to find out how they might get involved in this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eilish. That was really comprehensive. And I suppose just to say to everybody that those details are included in the publications, which everybody, all participants today will receive after today's event. And the publications will be on the websites of each of the organisations. So again, those details will be included there. So if you didn't catch them there, they will be available there. We now are going to move into the next stage of our event, which is a panel discussion. And Eilish is going to stay with us for this. Just to remind you all, if you have any questions, please add them into the chat function. And our panel discussion has a number of participants. So Eilish is going to stay with us. And we are joined by Paulina Tyminska. I'm sorry, Paulina, if I didn't get that quite right. Paulina has been a tenant of Circle Voluntary Housing Association since 2020. She lives in Waterford with her 2 children, and prior to moving into her Circle home, she'd been renting privately. Paulina joined Circle's Tenants Advisory Group in the middle of last year and has been working alongside the group on various initiatives. Paulina has a keen interest in policy from her previous employment and kindly has agreed to take part today to share her perspective and reaction to this project as a tenant, which is really invaluable. So thank you very much, Paulina. Alva McLaughlin is the Director of Policy with the Irish Council for Social Housing. And prior to taking up this role, Alva was the Housing Policy Advisor to Sinn Féin in the Oireachtas. Along with policy development, she also has experience in communications and research. Alva has a degree in law and Spanish from Queen's University in Belfast and was recently awarded an MSc in Politics and Data from the University College Dublin. And Steve Loveland is the National Resident Engagement Manager from Clúid. And Steve has over 20 years experience in housing, working across supported accommodation services, homeless services and social housing. Steve is currently responsible for the coordination and delivery of Clúid's resident engagement strategy, collaborating across the business and inspiring continued improvement and uptake of resident engagement initiatives that promote participation individually and collectively within communities and with Clúid staff. So thank you very much everybody for joining us on our panel. And as I say, we're inviting questions to come in via our chat function from participants. If people have questions about the research, about our participation in the project, or indeed anything else. And I might just start out with a couple of questions myself. So I suppose just first and foremost to ask of the other panel members, having heard from the research team, how do you feel that this research will better inform the work of the AHB sector? And I might go to you, Steve, to start off.
Thanks, Steve. And thanks, Eilish, for the very comprehensive review there. Wonderfully done. I suppose for myself, really, it's the provenance of this whole project is about addressing the gaps that are there. You know, there are far too many gaps at the moment, and that makes it really difficult for us to make sound decisions off of the back of. We're often asked, and I'm often asked to articulate the voice of the resident, but I don't think any of us are particularly clear on who the resident is, because it's so varied, so vast. And if we're not clear about who the resident is, we're certainly not clear on what matters most to the resident. And I think the founding principle of any of the social impact measurement is that we measure what matters. And without understanding what matters to the people we're charged to serve, we've got no hope. So my hope for this is that we'll start to close those gaps that currently exist, that we get closer to that shared understanding of what matters most.
So measuring what matters, I think is kind of a really important touch point. Going to you, Alva, what do you think in terms of that piece, in terms of this enabling us as the AHB sector to measure what matters? So really hearing the tenant voice.
Thanks, Niamh. I think purely coming from a policy development perspective, this kind of is the next step in terms of measuring the impacts, especially since the sector now is developing and delivering up to 50% of unused social homes across the country. So anything that gives us a wider picture and a broader picture of what tenants require and what they need all helps. And also coming back to what Eilish pointed out, informing policy and spend decisions, that's a hugely important factor, and it will be with the housing plan, the government's housing plan, and with the upcoming budgets and stuff. So anything that we can add to the debate about creating better communities and more sustainable communities will help us with that.
Okay, so very much about helping us and enabling us to respond better to meet tenant needs. And Paulina, coming from the perspective of a tenant, and so I suppose you're on the receiving end of the services that AHBs provide. Do you get a sense of how this might enable us to better do our jobs for you as a tenant?
For me as a tenant, this what kind of really stood out for me, that it's much more personal and individualistic. So it looks at things like which are relevant, like mental health. You mentioned this. You mentioned like about kids, more space for play dates, for social opportunities, being able to go outside. So I think those are the aspects that usually would not be seen in research, and it just makes it much more relevant to tenants themselves for everyday life.
So much more personalized and much more relevant is your
Yes.
feeling around that. And I'm just looking at one of the questions that came in through the chat, which was, and I might direct this to you, Eilish. Will the surveys identify any variation based on tenant age, family size, house versus apartment, and geographical location, etc.?
Yes, absolutely. So as I said, we are asking about all those demographics, and then it will be very straightforward to look at responses by the different demographics, but also geographies and types of home and so on. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of really interesting, rich data coming out of this. And, I suppose at the moment, all we're doing is saying this is what we're going to do. It'll be so much more interesting when we can convene again, hopefully, and discuss the actual findings.
Yes.
And I think this is, what we found with the interviews is that there's interest in this from all over Europe, because people have been looking for ways to measure the impact of social housing. Social housing is under pressure in every country, and people want to make a case for it, but they also, they recognize that these research gaps exist. So I think it's something that will not just be of interest in Ireland.
But this is very much the start of a process, and I suppose the start of a journey, and I suppose we have been saying that very much within our own organisation and Respond, that, it is start of the journey in terms of drilling down, getting better detail, and as Paulina was saying, in terms of ensuring that more personalised detail and more personalised response in terms of that. I see a question came in from Barry James just in the chat there, just asking what sample size is required to ensure statistical significance.
I think it will depend on.
It depends on the size of the
organisation. Size of the organisation, and the organisations are different sizes. It will depend as well on how many. Just bear in mind that in the first instance, it will just be they would just be collecting data with new tenants. So it depends on how many new tenants come in a particular year. So it may take some time to reach a sufficient number for it to be statistically significant. But at the same time, what I would say is that, organizations will be able to view this in real time. They should be looking at these data. They should be looking at who's responding, if they're getting under response in any area, if they need to consider booster samples, or if they need to, rethink the way that they're implementing it to improve the response rate. So it's not that you just ignore it for a couple of years.
It'll be a constantly evolving process.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I can give more detail on sample sizes in time once we have a better sense of a number of tenants. But at the moment, it's not really possible to give, a top of my head figure on that.
Okay. And a question that's come in just for Paulina, just in terms of how did you feel about participating in this process, and do you feel that your voice and the voice of tenants is heard in the feedback to date?
I'm very happy to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation. I think it's very, very important that while doing research, it's not just about the data, it's not just about the numbers, but that it becomes much more personal. So
it's
when
about
you
people.
meet and hear, it's about people at the end of the day. So if you hear the stories and you see actual people who are in the housing, it gives it gives a bit, it opens eyes like what other areas might be need to be researched, like what are the important things for the tenants. It's not just the numbers, but it becomes much more personal.
Mhm. Okay. And Steve, given your role is around tenant or resident engagement, do you see the value in terms of making that connection between this process and that overall resident or tenant engagement process?
Absolutely, because I think it's what there will hopefully allow us to do is to promote resident-led excellence. I think that's where we're trying to get to. We want to be effective partners. I think it was George Bernard Shaw who said that the only man who ever acts sensibly is a tailor, because he's the only person who takes his measurements every single time he meets him anew, whereas everybody else goes on with their old measurements and expected him to comply with them. And I think that
which really fits with Ailish's point in terms of it's a constantly evolving process that we need to keep tweaking it and tailoring it. It'll never be done. We'll keep evolving the process.
No, this really is a jumping off point, but it's a strong jumping off point, and it's that iterative process that, we continue to learn and develop as we go with it, this has to constantly evolve, because I think sometimes we do fall into the same trap of not being the tailor in this as well. And I think sometimes the problem with impact measurement is we're all doing measurement. We're measuring so many different things. We have huge amounts of measurements and huge amount of data, but not necessarily that level of insight that comes from that personal approach. And I think that leads to a problem, not so much then of evaluation, but of translation. How do we translate the change that we've captured into values that we can share with other people? That might be storytelling through the end of it.
And I suppose coming to you, Alva, then I suppose making that leap between like data, doesn't, tell enough of a story for us in and of itself. Like we need that insights, we need it in terms of that storytelling, and it to impact our work for those impacts in terms of, you were, talking in terms of, policy development, in terms of funding decisions. And I suppose I'm thinking of the wider membership of the ICSH. Can you see the applicability here and the relevance here?
Of course, Niamh. I mean, I think, as you all know, a lot of our members started out initially as providing services first, and then the housing came after. And our members are present in over 600 communities across the country, and they're already embedded in communities. So I think it's a huge additional step that can be taken to accurately reflect the new people coming into these communities. And if the services need to change a bit or to meet the housing needs, or if the housing needs need to change to meet some of the additional services that are required. So I think it's really important for all our members can use this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I see a question that's come in through the chat just asking, it's from Fiona Duncan, and hi Fiona, it's nice to see you online today, and just wondering how this framework compares to any similar frameworks in social housing impact in the UK or elsewhere. And Eilish, I know this was part of the work, maybe you could talk to that.
Yeah, hi Fiona, nice to see you again. Yeah, so the one that is most widely, the people would be most aware of is the HACT social housing framework. And I think there's several differences. I think the most important one is that sort of HACT aims to demonstrate, to identify economic monetized values for outcomes in social housing. So it provides the organizations with predefined values for different things like providing training to tenants. But the organizations don't necessarily go and directly measure the outcomes from training for tenants. So whilst it's easy to apply and there is some value to it, I think it probably creates a disincentive for organizations to actually go and gather that information themselves. And I think there's an assumption underpinning it that, training and financial inclusion is worth X, and if you train enough people, this is the value of it. I think what we're doing here is, the hard work really of going out and actually collecting this information. And that's where the evidence gap is, right? There is other research out there that you can draw on and so on, but we don't have anything that comes directly from social housing tenants in Ireland. It's a really interesting group to do research with. I think there will be interest in this from outside of social housing in other areas of public policy and so on. So I would see this as really quite different, and I think there is more value for you as organizations in collecting your own information. We did look at HACT and the applicability of HACT to
Yes. Yeah.
social housing in Ireland when we started out, and just felt that it wasn't really going to tell you, you know, the things that you were struggling with and the things you wanted to know. It wasn't going to give you those answers. So yes, I think this is probably more expensive and harder to implement, but the value of it will be much greater to you.
Okay, thank you. I can see lots of questions are coming in through the chat. They are being fed into me, and I'm getting through as many as I can. We probably won't get through them all today, I'm afraid, but we will get through as many as we can. I see one in here from Jenny, which is, what's the value that you might see for tenants themselves who do get involved and do get involved in participating in the surveys? I might go to you, Alva, just in terms of this.
Sure. I think the value is there in terms of, again, it kind of builds on the tenant engagement surveys. We all do them as organisations. We're doing one at the moment. I think as well it kind of feeds into, if you'll excuse my minute of plugging, our community housing awards in a couple of weeks. So when we go and we visit these projects, we also look at all of this, all the community benefit, we meet tenants, we meet local housing managers, we meet local authority staff. So I think like some of it's being done in silos, I suppose. So this is another important way of measuring everything that's kind of being done already, but not in a coherent way.
Okay, and maybe to you, Paulina, then, just in terms of what do you think the value is for tenants getting involved in this process, this research process, engaging in these surveys? Do you see a value for tenants?
I definitely do see a value in it, especially in the long term, because there cannot be any change if you don't really know what the change should be like. So in the long term, it will, at the end of the day, it is for tenants to make sure that our experiences are improved, that the housing all across the board meets certain standards. So in the long term, yes, it definitely would have benefits.
So that opportunity to have your say, to have that influence.
Yes, absolutely, to have the voice heard. And I think this is the big thing. It's like to actually be seen and heard as a tenant for the very personal experiences.
Okay, and an interesting question in from Laura MacDonald here. Is the framework solely for the AHB sector, or is it for the social housing sector as a whole? And how is it felt that the framework might be received by local authorities, central government, our funders, etc.? So I see you smiling there. Ailish, I might go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could actually use this survey with any tenure, right? So, you know, I think if you get into kind of private home ownership, you know, you've got big income differentials and you've got other factors influencing housing. But where I think it would be really interesting would be in to use it in HAP tenancies and in local authority housing as well. And then actually to extend it to cost rental, as I was saying. So, you know, the kinds of questions that are in here are the kinds of questions any of us who live in a house could answer about our experiences. But I think, you know, where do we really want to know, like where do we see the kind of other evidence gaps? And I would see local authority housing and HAP as being, and cost rental as being the ones that would be really interesting to apply it in. But at the end of the day, you know, we're all human beings. Any of us can answer these questions, so it's got really wide applicability. What the likelihood of it being taken up within local authorities is, I mean, it's hard to say. I can't see it being a priority for local authorities. But it might well be that there is one local authority out there that wants to trial it. And I think that would be really interesting. But I think it would be directly applicable. I don't think a local authority would have to make any changes to it.
And certainly, I suppose one of our key things is, you know, like we partner with local authorities all around the country. We partner with the Department of Housing, the Housing Agency, the HFA. They're key stakeholders to all of the work that we do. So obviously we'll be sharing all of the detail around all of this. We appreciate what they do, and what they do is different to what we do. And but we will be sharing our findings and our experience of all of this with our key stakeholders as well in terms of this process. Did anybody else want to come in terms of that question, or we might move on to a next one? There's a question in from Dara Turnbull, who's asking, will we be able to use the framework to put a monetary value on the social impact of social housing? And I think that goes back to the point you were making about HACT. Ailish, do you want to just come back further again on that?
Absolutely. I think you know where we felt the real gap is in measuring the outcomes. Once outcomes are measured, I think people don't realize this. I've background at Just Economics and doing a lot of work on economic evaluation and so on. Once you have measured outcomes, putting monetary values on them is actually reasonably straightforward. And I know that can seem like the most challenging part of it. The challenging part is measuring whether the outcome has taken place. And that's what we have set out to do here. Once that's done, I think this absolutely lends itself to monetization, and that could be done down the line. But in the first instance, we need to know whether the outcomes are taking place. I think that's a definite work once it's been implemented.
Okay. And just as a question here, and I might go to you, Steve, first on this one, is what are the key messages for staff implementing this framework? How would it change their working day, or would it be just another tick box exercise?
It certainly won't be another tick box exercise, and I think that's the commitment we're making here. This is a fundamental change in approach, in order to drive excellence and to drive effectiveness. And the iterative approach again means that whatever we learn as a result of doing will help inform the next process, and we'll see this progressing. For staff, there are definitely opportunities with how this has been structured to automate parts of it as well. And I think that was important. That was conversations we had as part of the working group throughout this, that this shouldn't be overly burdensome either on staff to get involved in, or for the residents who are being asked to complete the survey, because obviously there's issues there around survey fatigue as well. And I think that's why one of the real benefits to the survey, are real positives in the survey and the way it's been created, is that it is quite relatively straightforward and easy to complete. We hope that staff will find it as easy to administer as well.
And I think, I suppose speaking from our own organisation, and I suppose taking advantage of my position as chair here, is it's very much about enabling us to join the dots better as well between, the other bits of information that we have and the other bits of information that we have to understand better. And going back to the point that you made, Paulina, as well, in terms of personalising, being more responsive to the needs of tenants and service users. Alva, did you want to come in on that point in terms of how it might change the working day for staff on the ground?
Yeah, thanks, Niamh. I think I was just making some notes there. I think for us, the ICSH as an organisation can definitely help with this and help the staff and the AHBs. I mean, we do it anyway, but we can help facilitate workshops, round tables, policy discussions. And we have over 270 members across Tier 3, Tier 2, Tier 1s. So we're definitely able to help disseminate the information and try and get more AHBs involved in that.
Well, that's certainly something that we'll take you up on, Alva, because I think we're very keen to spread the message, to spread the experience so far, to tell the story so far, and to, I suppose, engage with people on the journey. Eilish, you want to come in there?
Just really quickly, I just wanted to make the point that technology has really transformed data collection, and so much of this can be automated now and done so quickly using technology. So I think people's older experiences of evaluation is that it's very onerous on staff, and that's not the case anymore. And the processes that are being developed are very streamlined so that most things are automated, and the input of staff is really minimized as much as possible.
Well, look, we might end on that note. I just wanted to acknowledge that there are lots of questions in the chat that unfortunately we didn't get to. I mean, really, it just demonstrates the amount of interest that there is in this piece. I think for us as three organisations, Respond, Clued and Circle, it really demonstrates the amount of appetite there is for this. And, there might be a possibility of having another event when we're further along to update people on the progress to date and how we're getting on in relation to this. Also in terms of engaging, and thank you for the invitation, Ava, to engage with the ICSH around this, because there might be an opportunity to do something around that as well. And to really, I suppose, get the opportunity to share this. Certainly we don't feel this is something that we own. We're very happy to see it as something that might be used across the sector and beyond in terms of that. So I just wanted to say a couple of thank yous before I close proceedings today. So first of all, thank you to all of the tenants who really shared generously of their time, their experience, and participated in the research. And thank you very much, Paulina, for participating today. I know it's not necessarily easy, so thank you very much for participating. Thank you to all of the academic, policy and practice experts who took part in the interviews and helped inform the research. To Just Economics, thank you for their expertise, their coherence in developing the framework, and also their patience. Working across three organisations isn't always easy, so just to say a huge thank you in terms of that. To those who joined me on the research advisory group, and note there have been some staff changes in this period of time, so everybody wasn't involved at the same time, but that it has included Claire Ostick from Clued, Neil Bolton from Respond, Liz Clark from Circle, Kat Cottier from Clued, but now at Fold, Rahana Cushnan from Respond, Andrew Daly from Clued, Fiona Duncan from Clued, Kate Inez from Clued, Steve Lunland from Clued, and Aoife O'Fergal from Circle. To all of our speakers here today, Paulina Tyminska, Alva McLaughlin, Steve Loveland, John Hannigan and Ailish Lawler, to all of you for attending today. We really appreciate all of the interest, all of the engagement. It really has overwhelmed us. We're delighted to see such engagement and such interest. Following upon the event today, we will be sending out the reports to all of those registered, and you can download the copies from any of the three partner organisation websites, and that's Clued, Circle or Respond. And if you want to hear more, there are contact details in all of the partner reports as well. So just to say thank you very much, really appreciate all of the engagement. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye bye.